Hello, and welcome to the Rankin Report for Sunday, February the 28th, 2021. Among the people of this nation, there is a growing sense that the government that the founders designed and implemented somehow is no longer in force. And many of those in government now desire a despotic rule, similar to that which pushed the founders to separate themselves from Great Britain. This rule, however, is international, which would surrender American sovereignty to an oligarchical form of government made up of elites ruling the entire planet, one which the American people neither want nor have opportunity to vote to approve or disapprove. The people, by and large, know that something is wrong. But the decline of education regarding the history of the founding of the United States and the mechanisms of our Constitution have left many average Americans without the words to express the uneasy feelings that they have. In the hope of providing some form of remedy, I am analyzing, paragraph by paragraph and line by line, the Declaration of Independence, to try and show the founders' thoughts and both differences and similarities to the conditions of nearly 250 years ago. And today, we're going to go into part 2, the core beliefs of the founders. The second paragraph of the Declaration goes into what the founders believed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light or transient causes. Moreover, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. In the preamble to the Declaration, the founders, mostly Thomas Jefferson, establish a strong personal belief in God, and because of this, people are entitled by nature and by God to dissolve their former political connections and establish their own when it becomes necessary. The founders' interpretation of Scripture was that when rulers do not act in line with God's laws as expressed in Scripture, acting against the interests of the people they were charged with protecting, then rulers have lost their authority from God to rule, and people have the right to set up new rulers that will act in line with Scripture to protect the people. These were revolutionary ideas, no pun intended, for the late 18th century, but the founders would elaborate further on them into words and phrases that were heard around the world, even louder than the proverbial shot fired at the Battle of Lexington in 1775, the so-called shot heard round the world. The idea that all men are created equal drove further the founders' stake into the heart of the divine right of kings concept, with additional blows coming from the statements that the rights of all humans come from God and are unalienable. The modern phrase would be inalienable, but it doesn't matter. Either way, it means that they cannot be taken away or denied. And please note that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are among the unalienable rights that come from God, as in not necessarily limited to these. Further, the idea behind government was to be limited in size and scope and could not do anything without the consent of the people affected by the government's decisions. This was an idea that came straight from Scripture. Straight out of the Bible, you might say. For example, in the book of Deuteronomy, specific rules and conditions were laid down for the Israelites entering the Promised Land as to how they were to conduct themselves. In chapter 17 of that book, God lays down rules for investigating whether or not people violated the covenant that the people made with God and began worshiping false gods. The people of the local community did the research, and the locals were to execute judgment on the guilty. The only reason for going to the national level, as it were, was if the case was too difficult for the locals. And even then, it was the priests under the Levitical system that were to handle the matter. Additionally, if the people desired a monarchy to be installed, the same chapter contains rules for what the king was to do and, just as important, what not to do, to avoid the tyrannical practices of the other kings of the region. The concept of first among equals is established here, and this is what Jefferson echoes in the Declaration. In 1 Samuel 11, for example, when Saul, the first king of Israel, is informed of the Ammonite siege of the Israelite town of Jabesh, he had just come in from plowing his own field. Where was the pomp? Where was the fancy robes and all that sort of thing? They weren't there. He's out there working like a field hand. The rest of the paragraph expands on the concept of the people having the right to change their form of government if the established system is no longer protecting and securing of, but destroying their rights. Jefferson lays down the caution that changing government is usually a big, messy process that one does not do on a mere whim, and that people usually are willing to put up with a few annoyances for the sake of not rocking the boat, as it were. But eventually a pattern emerges where government has gotten too big, too invasive, and its members have let their position go to their heads. Only when those in the system clearly are bent on imposing a tyrannical rule over the people who put them in government in the first place to protect their interests do people consider change. In fact, Jefferson takes it a step further. It is the people's duty to effect change. Such may be the case now with what America is looking at. Not that we're planning on taking up arms, but some believe we are already in a second American Civil War, for now a cold one. But people do not like what is happening, and haven't for some time. However way change is effected, you first need to point out what needs changed. And that brings us to grievances, which we will start unpacking next time. That's the Rankin Report for Sunday, February the 28th, 2021. God bless you. Have a good day.